thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today/tonight we are recording Festive Season Parenting Tensions. We were just sitting down having a conversation together and we were talking about, how do you deal with husbands and partners, and that must happen for you. And I said, Stop talking, Bridget.
Let's record.
There's got to be something in this conversation for, you out there listening. So we just want to remind you to jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au before we dive into this and join up to, sign up to join our tribe, which once a week we send you an email with all of our links and blurbs to everything we've put out in the world, so you can pick and choose where you'd love to dive deeper. And occasionally we send you a second love letter email where we just talk about something we're loving on, something that's happened that's been incredible in our week, or something we'd really love to share with you. So please jump on to nourishingthemother.com.au and sign up to join our tribe. Now, festive season frenzy.
I think it's a big one to touch on around the parenting and relationship dynamic thing, because heading into such a crazy time of year, there's such heightened emotion, expectation, pressure, and I think for so many mothers it can fall on their shoulders, as the kind of the head of the family, as the one responsible for pulling it all together, as the one responsible for guiding children. And I certainly am feeling it with my son. Probably this is the first time that Christmas has been like the bee's knees. He's 4.5, nearly 5, and he's been talking about Christmas for months. Now it's about 10 times a day now. It's a question of how many sleeps for Christmas, and and you can sense the excitement and the mystery for him, and I'm really wanting to nurture that spirit. But some days, like today, I was kind of taken to my edge in terms of how to create space for his wonderment and excitement at the same time as not letting it get out of control, and giving it a boundary as well, because he's almost looking for that. And so I think some people, other mothers might find that too in their kids, that they're almost looking for a safe space in which to let go of all of the big feelings that come up around this time of year, because there's so many unknowns for kids, and there's so much, I guess, cultural undertones around the good, the bad, the family members, and the not kind of knowing how they fit into social situations and family situations. There's so much that little bodies are kind of dealing with at this time of year, I think.
I don't know where you want to go from there. I was just really interested in what you had to say.
Well, I guess I can give it a little bit of story about maybe like today, because we went to the shops, which maybe is a crazy idea.
I think you were crazy. As you said that, I was like, are you insane?
Well, it wasn't a shopping centre. I wouldn't go there. But I
was like strip shops.
Yeah, strip shops.
Yeah, that makes a difference.
So I had to go and do some errands, and but granted, all of the shops were busy. There was lots of kind of hurried looking faces, and I sense a bit of tension in some shops around like children being around, which was
just so much stuff everywhere.
And people trying to shop, and like little kids can pick up on that a mile away too. So in the first shop, Hugo kind of wanted everything. The next shop was the post office, and he also found a whole bunch of stuff that he wanted, but recognised he wasn't going to get it, but was still thinking ahead about when he might be able to get it, because it wouldn't be this Christmas, but maybe another Christmas, And so then, by the time we walked further down the street, then we stopped and got some lunch, and he completely melted down, threw himself on the ground because it wasn't the lunch that he wanted. And we moved through that and found balance again. Then we went to Target, and he wanted to look at the Lego, and I said, no, we need to get moving. So then he threw himself on the ground in Target. Again, moved through it all. Got out into the shopping centre. It was like always a little shopping centre. And he threw himself on the ground there. And we picked it all up and kept moving. But by then, I held an enormous amount of space, but I could still feel my nervous system rattled, right? Because even if I'm present with it, even if I'm holding space, I can still feel the people around me perhaps being really challenged by it, and just me knowing that I'm hitting my own edges and breaking past them, because you can sense that kind of two people on your shoulder, the kind of primal programming from our own childhood that's wanting to almost punish or run away, and then the prefrontal cortex kind of wiser brain coming on going, no, this is about pent-up feelings, this needs to come out, it's safe for him to release his stuff.
So how did you do that in a busy shopping centre? What does that look like?
Getting down at his level a lot of the time and going repeating back to him what I hear him saying. You know, so to make him feel heard, because there's like, you know, the desperation in his voice kind of wanting to get me to see something. So he was saying that he wanted to look at the Lego. And so I got down and looked him in the eye, because his eyes are darting everywhere at this point. So he's really not even in his body. He's not in his body at all. And so I'm like, I really hear you want to look at the Lego, but we're not going to look at it right now. I said, can you look at me? Can you listen to me saying this to you? We're not going to get it right now. We're going to pay for this and we are going to go. You know, and again, like him not being okay with that, and so me sort of repeating it back to him and giving him a sense that he's being feeling heard, but at the same time, this is my limit. And eventually I had to actually pick him up and carry him out of the shop, you know, and I realised afterward that I'd left something there, which is so annoying. But anyway, it happens, right? When everything just goes, you just focus on that. And so again, it was just continuing to try and maintain that eye contact with him, trying to get him to connect into his body, to find his breath again, recognise that he was feeling out of balance right now. Some bits and pieces like that I kept trying to go back into him with. And it was somewhat successful by the end of it, and he'd come back into himself again. But man, like, it's taxing. It's deeply taxing.
Holding another person's space is. And that's, you know, hence the need for a big refill.
Yeah.
You know, personal refill.
Yeah.
Because how much can you hold if you are constantly, you know, running that car outwards and not refilling it? Like, there's only so far you can go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could feel that. Like, I was driving home just feeling so lethargic and
drained.
You know, because it's big, and you know, there's like at one point that like Sylvie was melting down too. You know, like, 'cause she doesn't want to be in her pram at the moment. She wants to walk everywhere. So. So yeah, fun.
Well, and because of course every time, I mean, not only are you trying to hold and facilitate your child through their feelings, but whatever they're doing is on some or many levels triggering you and your own stuff.
Absolutely.
So if you're conscious parenting in that one moment, you're parenting internally. There's part of you that's kind of running behind the scenes, you know, your own mini.
And I could feel that happening. I could like kind of feel almost like on some level like I was bringing in like a circuit breaker. Yeah. In terms of how the behaviour would have been dealt with if it was me at the same age versus how I'm choosing to deal with it now.
Yeah. So you're really having to control to some extent your own inner monster or your own, you know, healing, your own capacity to want to just, you know, lash out or do or, you know, I mean, that's huge. That kind of background computer work is huge.
Yeah. And it's funny because it doesn't matter how much you know, in inverted commas, we are still so much, you know, at the mercy of so often that earlier programming, and our kids will keep bringing that to us at every age. You know, you and I were talking, like, I certainly find that I need to be reading some stuff around this, you know, brain development, developmental psychology stuff a couple of times a week so that I'm staying, it's front of mind, because if I'm not immersing in it on some level, then I will just revert back to whatever program I've got for age 4 and 8 months in a shopping centre doing this. Because we go by what we learned. Yeah. And as our kids are growing, they're revealing new parts of us we haven't yet faced. So it's a great reminder of how important it is for us to continue to come back to this stuff. And I was reminded of that when I was debriefing with my husband, because, you know, he like was looking at me almost kind of like rolling his eyes and saying, you know, he's like, I would have like cracked it by then, completely lost it. I'm like, yeah, but like, don't you see why it's happening? Like,
was he saying it though in terms of awe, or was he saying it as in, nah, wouldn't have done it that way?
No, nah, wouldn't have done it that way. Like, because he almost thinks like I give too much rope in that situation. Like, he would have been like, nah, that's, you know, by the third time that would have been enough. I wouldn't have had a bar of that. You know, but I'm like, yeah, but like, where's it go if you don't want to have a bar of it? Because it doesn't just disappear. It's got to go somewhere, and it's there to be expressed. But then I recognise he hasn't done anywhere near the amount of learning, you know, work that I've done. Yeah, you know, doesn't have the focus and intention that I have, and so I can't blame him for that. But at the same time, I'm also kind of like, but how can you not see that that's not a behaviour in isolation? It's a behaviour as a feedback or like a red flag of something much deeper. But it's a reminder, and for so many mothers particularly who are trying to choose this path and do butt heads sometimes with their partners, that they're not on the same page as us often if this is what we're choosing, because we're choosing it from our own sense of something missing in our childhood. We're choosing it from our own sense of wanting something different for our kids and for our partners. That might not be their story. They might give their love or their attention or their holding of space in a very different way than we perhaps do. And I recognise, ways where my husband gives enormously that I don't, But for me, I suppose it's the value around feeling heard when there's big feelings, whereas my husband doesn't have the capacity, nor I don't think the desire to hear that. And is that wrong? I mean, I want to say it's wrong, but then if he's not giving that, where is he giving?
I totally get you've got to balance that. Part of me wonders, though, when it's such a top value of yours, to some extent I wonder if there has to be, a compromise, so to speak, between those two, your husband's version, your version of value systems in order for a relationship to work. I mean, what do you think about that?
Oh, yeah. And I was
like a crossing over of values.
Yeah. And, I mean, he has said to me in the past, he's like, teach me what you know, teach me how to understand that. So he is willing, but I also recognise that there would be moments where he'd be taking, as he has been, and simply just go by what he knows. Which wouldn't always be something that he'd be particularly proud of. It would be it'd be more anger, it'd be more shut down, it'd be more mainstream kind of parenting approaches.
Yeah. So when he was saying that to you tonight, like, oh, well, I wouldn't have done that, I would have shut that down way earlier. Do you feel in your body like there's a level of he's already triggered hearing you talk about it? Yeah, okay, so he's not even in the moment. Like, he's already, just by hearing you talk about it, in that trigger. Yeah. Which in and of itself is actually quite genius, right? Because you're almost, like, just teasing your way into that trigger. It's really quite extraordinary, really, if you think about it.
Well, I mean, I've seen, because there's only been ever one time, and everyone comments on his incredible patience, and he is enormously patient, but it's like, you push someone so far and the switch flicks, because I don't think he's particularly good at boundaries. Because, we talk a lot about boundaries and learning our boundaries, and perhaps some of the reasons why I'm able to hold space as well as I do is because I know where my boundaries are, and I try to set them before I completely lose myself. Whereas I think he gives and gives and gives because he thinks he should.
Yeah, and he's lost that's what a good dad does.
Yeah, because that's what a good dad does. And then he gets pushed that little bit too far and has lost it, gone completely offline, which has happened once before and I've seen it and it was awful. But it has also opened up a lot of opportunity for conversation and for him to reflect on his relationship with his father and what he does and doesn't want, his relationship with our son and daughter. So sometimes those edges that we find ourselves in really kind of call us to reflect and reset and choose what we want to kind of go forward with. And so I think that there's an ongoing conversation, because the funny thing is, like, he wouldn't have that same attitude if we're talking about a baby or a toddler. So on some level I also see him perhaps saying, for nearly 5 or whatever, you should be out of that stage now, or that you should be more grown up than that, without recognising that he's still really a little child.
What age did his dad leave?
When he was 7. And I'm very interested to see what comes up then, because that will be...
But were there rifts in the marriage before?
Yeah. Lots of, like, fighting and challenge, I think.
And had Dad, in inverted commas, kind of left the marriage pre-actually physically leaving?
I don't know that much, but it would have been, probably not like years before, but it would have been like, he would have been not present for a while, I would say, because, he met another woman, really kind of checked out, I think. But I know, like, Marcus recalls, like, his parents fighting, and him not wanting that. So that's also, like, for us, like, finding a way to go into conflict in a way that's healthy, because for him it's just, like, not safe. Conflict is not safe, because that's what he, learns. So his way is just to continue to do acts of service to avoid conflict.
Yeah, just keep pleasing.
Yeah. Which is, almost...
Which is that classic, I'm willing to give up part of me in order to hold on to you.
Yeah.
Which is what he would have played out, in his childhood as well with his parents.
And it's in some ways a very masculine kind of way of being in a relationship, where you're afraid of going into wounds, so you'll continue to provide.
Yeah, that's right, because that's the safer path to go on.
Yeah.
So when you recognise that your husband's triggered, how do you enter that situation with him? Do you hold space for him, or you just leave it?
Well, I mean, if it's a dynamic in which like the kids are involved, I find it hard to hold his space and theirs. Like that's really difficult. I'll say, look, I can see that you're having a hard time, being with this right now, so I can take over if you need to go and get some space. Will be kind of how I do it. It's very rare though. It's only been once or twice, and it's probably because we're both pretty well aware of self-checking ourselves, and I'm quite good at bringing stuff back around to myself, which then I think calls everyone to do that. Like, so if I say, I'm feeling really frustrated right now because blah, 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 me taking ownership on some level calls other people to take ownership of their feelings as opposed to it being, you're doing this, blah, blah, blah. So I think that also calls my husband into ownership of where he's at. And we talk a lot, like, we debrief a lot about like kind of what our goals are with the kids and kind of, the way that we want them to, feel about themselves in the world and feel connected to us. So there's really good agreement there, but I think that there's definitely some places that he will be taken to, particularly as our kids grow, that will be facing very much how he would have been shut down. And him naturally going to that place, because unless you've consciously gone and tried to repattern it, that's what will stick. Yeah.
I love your little intro.
Include that. Consider that little intro, little segue. Now's a great time to talk about our next round of Loathing to Loving, which is our signature program, and it's all about transformation. It's all about seeing what's going on in our world and how to glean the wisdom from it, the stuff that keeps showing up, the kind of the mirror of our partner perhaps, which is where we're talking about here. Perhaps it's the deep challenge that we're finding in terms of the way we're labelling ourselves and what we don't like about ourselves, how to find the gratitude for that, how to cultivate a deeper sense of connection with ourselves, our sensuality, and bring together all of the beauty and wisdom within us that we so often want to not see. And really be held by tribal women as we do that, which is so much of what this is about. Because I think for everybody who's been part of Loathing to Loving, our content is one piece of it, and the way that the community comes together to help each other work through it and grow together is just profound and continues to ripple out.
Oh my gosh, I actually agree with you. I actually think they're almost, the content is huge, obviously it's in there, over the course of 5 weeks, but it is actually the tribe that gets you through. And I often think that, I think women, you know what it's like, we just break through shit when we're in this group of incredible, being held by another woman or women. Like, we all break through.
And so much of what we teach is really, it's a paradigm shift, and you need other people on that same wavelength with you so that you're able to integrate it into your life and continually coming back to that. Whereas if you're out on your own... And seeing in action with the people in their lives. I totally agree with you. So, jump on board. We're going to kick it off in early Feb, and we'd love you to be part of it. So hop on to the website nourishingthemother.com.au, Loathing to Loving program. Doodaloo. And I think it's really relevant to be talking about this stuff that we find perhaps a rub with our partner or those closest to us around this time of year, because it is a bit of a melting pot of togetherness so often when we're at home, and perhaps people are kind of coming down off a massive year of work, or they're really desiring a certain kind of outcome for their break, and whatever has been festering through the year will likely turn up in this holiday season for us to see and look at and work through.
I love that. Do you remember when you went on your holiday? I think it was to Bali, and you wrote a blog post about you can't take a holiday from yourself, or it was something.
Well, it's like wherever you go, there you are. Right?
There was a more eloquent line.
And if you have like a fantasy around this beautiful, peaceful family holiday, then you're going to be slapped in the face with a nightmare, right? Like whatever needs to be worked through will present itself.
And that's part of why I thought it was really important that we did this topic this week, is because we probably need a few extra toolkits to get us through perhaps the intensity we may not even be aware that we're about to face. By virtue of having perhaps our partner or our family in our intimate space for an extended period of time. And that can seem amazing, and then the reality of that can be something else. So we just thought, let's just, what's that something forewarned? What's that for something forewarned? Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
But let's just, let's kind of flag it for ourselves, shall we? That's a less eloquent way of putting it. I knew where you were going, but I couldn't think of
My
it.
mum used to say it all the time. Now I can't think what it is. Anyway, when you go, it'll come to me later. So I just thought there's probably a few things. I think there's probably, you know, having the extra parent in the life of your children. Perhaps if you have the main control, so to speak, over how your children are raised, it can seem like, oh yay, an extra set of hands, but often it can be, holy fuck, what is going on here?
Yeah, I would not have dealt with it that way, you know?
Yeah, and there's clashes, you know. I think it's, you've got different values. Your version of family time might be different. Your version of downtime might be different. I was out to coffee with a group of mums today, and they were all talking about that, how we actually started talking about screens, and then they were like, yeah, but that's what my husband likes. He wants to get home and he wants to put the TV on, so he'll give each of the kids an iPad and he'll sit down and put his earphones in, and that's his downtime. Or all he wants to do is, you know, da-da-da. And they were all like, oh, that's not what I want.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
This is hard.
Yeah.
Like this change of perhaps the intensity you want to parent with, the consciousness you want to parent with, or even the practical way that you do things. And all of it, I think, is a bit of a soup. So some of it will be highlighting growth for ourselves because it's a mirror. Whatever we're getting irritated at them for is really what we're not owning in ourselves.
That's right.
And I think it's also a way of stepping up in your relationship, of stepping up in your sense of self and autonomy in this world, and perhaps of a way of, you know, baptism by fire in parenting. If you've hit a new stage or evolution with your child and you're needing to upskill and you've maybe put that on the back burner, well, you know, that pain's going to get bigger until it makes you actually do that.
Yeah. And this is the classic time of year for that.
Yeah. And so I so get what you were saying before about, you know, keeping your toe dipped in parenting. I actually do think this is also when our private members group comes in handy, because it is about that 80-20 rule. The thing that you do most of the time is the thing that sticks.
Yeah.
And, you know, like we never want to do a course where you do it and then you
forget it all.
You're on fire for 3 weeks and then it's like...
And then someone's like, oh, who was that schizophrenic that was in my house, you know? Because it's such a split. You really need to be bathing in it.
You need to be bathing in it, constantly dipping your toe into it, constantly upskilling. And the same thing, I don't know about you, Bridge, but I can read the same book 3 times over the course of 2 years and get something completely different out of it.
Because you're ready for something different.
Exactly. And so I do think, like our group, I think that's part of what keeps everybody moving, is because we're constantly, every couple of days, having conversations that keep us all fueled on, oh yeah, that's right, oh yeah, that's important to me, oh yeah, you know, da-da-da. And same for self-growth, personal growth, you know, tooling ourselves over this Christmas period. I think get on the podcasts.
Yeah.
Get on, you know, that you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And let me tell you, that includes people in the virtual world.
Yes.
Because whoever's in your ear is who's going to become part of your narrative.
Yeah, it's so true. And that's why it's so fantastic that the age we live in, when we can really be intentional about who we expose ourselves to.
Yeah.
You know?
So I would say this year too, well, I certainly do it every holidays, but I would suggest to you also, is to pre-think about what you're going to kit yourself up with to continuously dip your toe in the things that are most important to you. So I would be looking at downloading audiobooks, ordering books online that you know you're going to want to read, jumping onto forums or groups, or signing up to, you know, instead of maybe, you know, the commercial Christmas present, having a course that you want to sign up for that you really love to invest something of yourself into or into your family. Like, I think start thinking about what are the things you can start to put into momentum that, you know, really have you sitting in your top value, I would say.
And honouring yourself for choosing that too, because I think so often if you are on this conscious parenting path, sometimes it can feel like, you know, why do I bother when, you know, I'm surrounded by a world where no one else cares about this stuff, or, you know, that you know, these kids turn out all right, but is that what you want? We on some level really need to accept sometimes the inspiration within, even when we don't want to, you know, to really kind of say to our inner light, which might be beaming towards a certain direction for us, to say to that light, I will listen and I will honour you, and even when maybe the rest of the world doesn't, because that's what we're being called to. And it's a lot harder to honour that voice within and honour that light within when it doesn't perhaps conform to what perhaps the rest of the world around you is doing. But I think that's also all the more important to listen to it, because it's there with a message not only for you but for all the ripples it's going to create around you.
And your top value is always part of your genius.
Yeah, it's an expression of that.
Yeah. I think always follow it. So part of my, like you, Bridge, part of my toolkit for this Christmas would be pre-think about what you're going to have around you to continuously dip your toe in, just to keep you on path, to keep you centred, and to remind you perhaps of the consciousness that you would really like to hold for yourself and your family. And
I think really think about perhaps what may come up for your children, or what evidence is showing up now of what could be something that you'll be facing around that time of year. So, I know, for instance, that there's likely to be big feelings and big meltdowns post-Christmas because of the incredible excitement. And, a really mainstream attitude would be, look how grateful you are, you got all these things and you're not even happy about it. And that shows a real lack of understanding of our psyche and of children's emotions. And so if we really want to come at it with a different way, then we need to think carefully around the people that are around us. Perhaps it's our partner, and we need to talk to them about, this is what I see might happen. I'd really like you to be able to recognise what's going on with our child and see it not as a problem with the behaviour, but simply the feelings that they've got being okay, and us allowing an outlet for those feelings. That even happened for us just on the weekend just gone. Both my kids just cried for about 2 hours after a family Christmas event, and I knew it was going to happen. My husband wasn't in the headspace to listen to it, so he kind of watched the cricket and I dealt with it, and I was totally fine with that. And we had kind of an unspoken agreement that was how it was going to go. And I think when you prepare yourself for those things and know that around this time of year our kids often do need quite a bit more space to allow the feelings to come out, then there can be more room for harmony too once those feelings have been allowed to move.
I totally agree with you. I'm not sure about the unspoken agreement thing though.
Well, I think I wouldn't intend to have an unspoken agreement, but
because it caught you unawares.
Caught me unawares, yeah. But I would intend to talk about it.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So now I get where your wisdom's coming from.
Yeah. But in hindsight, I could see that he knew I had it, and I knew he was doing his thing.
Yeah.
But because that leaves so much room for grey and misunderstanding.
Yeah, that's what
it's better to have that conversation up front and say, look, I think this is how it might go.
Yeah.
I would really appreciate if you could support me in blah, perhaps, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
What would you say?
No, I was about to say I totally agree. I think, I think one of the biggest pitfalls of relationships is unspoken agreements or assumed knowledge.
Yeah.
Don't ever assume is what I've learned from a long-term monogamous relationship. I think assumptions lead us into probably some of our darkest hours.
Yeah.
Because we assume anyone in their right mind would think that or know that or do that. And in actual fact, we're two completely different people looking at the world through two completely different filters, through two completely different upbringings. We will literally never see reality.
And it's so important to constantly remind ourselves of that.
Because never going to see it the same way, ever. Even when we so very badly want to be right, they will never, ever see it that way. Yeah. And I think that was, probably one of the biggest realizations for me, probably halfway through our marriage, that then made me realise I had to get really super clear on my communication. And in actual fact, his misunderstanding was my faux pas in not being clear.
Yeah, yeah.
So as much as he wasn't willing to listen beyond the superficial, I wasn't willing to explain beyond the superficial either. So we were both sitting in our comfort/discomfort levels and wanting it to be the other person's fault. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally, yeah.
So I think assumed knowledge should never be the case. I think the way to really workshop potential issues is to talk about them and talk about them as explicitly, as minutely, and as clearly as you possibly can, so that there is nothing left to assumption.
Yeah.
I think there should never be anything left to assumption. Even when I think, no, I don't need to talk about that detail, I have to remind myself, no, rewind, hang on a minute, I just need to go back to this to make sure we're on the same page. And nearly 100% of the time, even if it seems like a ridiculous thing, my husband will smile and go, good, thanks. Because now there's no assumed knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now he doesn't have to make any sort of quantum leap. He doesn't have to fall short of my expectations. And he gets to show up for me in a way that he knows is going to please me. It's how to create a win-win, not a win-lose.
A win-win.
Yeah. So I would also say get minute in your conversations.
And the Queen's Code, like I know we always talk about, that is a great book for getting your head around what this looks like in practice.
Yes, how to communicate to the masculine, I think. I also, I have so many conversations with my friends at the moment around communicating with husbands, and I realise that just like puberty and sexuality, it's never the one conversation. It's the many seemingly pointless conversations that stack one upon the other that actually have the lasting impact. Because I was sitting with a group of probably 6 women this morning who I deeply love, and I was listening to all of their partner dynamics, and I was like thinking, fuck, that's not my husband at all. And in the end, they're all talking about it. I'm going, whoa, I really want to sit here and go, yeah. And actually, the fact I said something I'm sitting here going here is, fuck, I'd be really like Devo if my husband was like that. Yeah, like I feel really like heartbroken for you. That's like really hard. And one of my beautiful friends who knows me really well said, yeah, but that's because every time we've gone, fuck you, and walked out of a conversation, even silently, you should know that, or why should I have to do that for you? She said, you've stepped into that conversation. I haven't.
Yeah, and that is the difference.
And look, I so applauded her for saying that, because I thought, that's, huge for both of us. And I don't want to sit here and say I've got the golden ticket on marriage, because I don't also think that I do. But what I'm willing to do is constantly push myself into the discomfort of the minute. Because what's easier is to just skim over it and be like, you should know that.
Yeah, and just disconnect.
Yeah. And I realise it's like this thing, because I know it's from my childhood too, but even I always think about it in terms of a recipe. So I'm quite a good cook. I can make something out of nearly anything that's hanging around in my cupboards. And it's a skill that has always marvelled my husband. And he has a repertoire of, 4 standard meals that he can cook and he just recycles. So when it comes to, we made an agreement when I had Gwen that he would cook weekends and I would cook weekdays, because I needed a break on the weekends from having to think about it and plan about it and, all of that stuff. And that's largely been working really well. And it used to be a source of a really big argument for us, because he'd pick a recipe and he would constantly be asking me, do we have this? What does this mean? How much of that would you put in? Da-da-da. And I would sit there and I'd go, you're fucking shitting me. I would have cooked this and I would have saved us all of this. Instead, I'm sitting here having this conversation. This is supposed to be my time. And instead, I'm having a conversation with you about how to cook something that I can just do and not have this conversation with you about. This is madness.
Yeah.
And I think we had this conversation about this one topic. I don't know. So many conversations. It actually now makes me laugh. Makes him laugh now too. Used to drive me fucking bonkers.
Yeah.
And now, whenever I prepare myself, now I know he's going to cook, I make sure I take a really big breath while he's reading the recipe, and I keep focusing on my big breath.
Yeah.
And he asks me a question and I will answer it. And then if I say to him, can you chuck this on the that, for so long, I wind it back. I'm asking if you can please put this much water into this particular pot and put it on at this temperature, da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
And then he goes, thanks. I'm like, that's what it is. It's the minute recipe as opposed to assumed knowledge.
I love that example, because it's such a beautiful illustration of exactly what you mean, right?
Oh, I hope so. I was thinking halfway through my story on this point.
No, I got it. I saw you bring it back.
Okay, thanks. So that's what I think about conversations, is never assume the recipe, right? Never assume knowledge. Assume there's no knowledge, and be courageous enough to speak it without coming from a wounded place, I think is the other key. To speak it in a place of vulnerable strength and autonomy rather than neediness, I suppose. And I think it comes from being really clear, and I think it comes from You know, you don't have to have the one conversation that goes for 2 hours. You can have a series of 5-minute conversations if that's where your partner is at. Because I don't think that everybody can sit down and have a heart-to-heart conversation for 2 hours. I don't think that that's possible for a lot of people. And I think it's completely okay to have one big conversation stretched over several days if you both have a marriage agreement that you can enter and exit a conversation when it gets too heated or too, you know, internally you're getting too much conflict or triggering, that you have a right to say, I'm feeling really triggered right now, I'm going away, but I will be back at this time, or I will come back to you when. As long as you give up, I'm coming back to you, I think that's fine. I don't necessarily expect that we have to have, if it's a really big trigger or topic, that things sorted in the one conversation. And I think it's in fact wise to be able to self-regulate enough to know you can enter and exit, and that space will still be held. And that you don't need to hold a grudge in between and move into wounded spaces of disconnection in between because you're saying, I'm coming back to you. I think that's the important factor in communication.
I love it.
So that would be my advice, is to be where they're at, to assume nothing and give them a minute recipe, and have the willingness and the emotional vulnerability to know that it's safe for either one of you to leave and come back, knowing you're coming back to each other because you've already had a minute conversation about your capacity and your agreement to come back to each other. Like, it's the stacking of conversations, it's not the one big one. And then I think
particularly if you're wanting to enter into this space, the suggestion of it being one big one is overwhelming and perhaps quite scary.
Too much.
Yeah,
and particularly if they're triggered. So I think about, you know, you coming home to husband and saying, you know, this, and he's already triggered hearing about it. You're not going to deal if he's already in a triggered space and hash out this conversation in a way that you'd love it to be consciously evaluated and heartfelt communication back. Like, that's not happening if that's where he's at.
No.
And so it's the gentle stacking of many conversations.
And that's also why all is not lost even when there is a trigger, right? Because the trigger is also that's the first step, right? That's what brings awareness too. And we always know awareness is the first step towards transformation. And so it may be that you enter into a conversation where there are, you know, perhaps triggers every time until you get below that and understand why. And that might be a number of conversations, but it's just making that safe. And finding within yourself the courage to step into the trigger, knowing that they're triggered and you're triggered, and it is an uncomfortable place, but it's an uncomfortable place because it's calling you there.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say that's step 2 and 3. And I would say step 4, maybe, Bridge, is what you were talking about earlier, was just the balancing of, instead of wanting to read someone as... we was talking about self-checking our own self-righteousness, actually. It's probably 2 facets.
Yeah.
So I think it's self-checking our own self-righteousness, because we can get, particularly in this conscious parenting world, and when we're on like this journey of self-awakening, we can get incredibly self-righteous. Like, well, this is the way it is, and this is the way it should be. And the more that we build a self-righteousness and a pride... Right, pride comes before the fall for a reason, right? Is the universe will equilibrate us for us, and it will come in the form of more conflict and more ways of tearing you down because you're trying to boost yourself up in an infatuated way. Yeah,
and you've almost unconsciously called them in to shut you down because you are incredibly unbalanced in that state too. Like, you need them to play the role of bringing you back down in whatever form that looks like.
To bring you back into humility and balance.
Yeah.
But you can do that on your own, is recognising when you're feeling really self-righteous or really driven about something needing to be right, that you're entering the space of a trigger.
Yeah.
So then it becomes ever greater levels of self-awareness and seeing how the other side has just as many benefits as yours does, even when you don't want to see them.
Yeah. And when you don't want to see them, you know that you're in that state of kind of self-righteousness, really, when you're resistant to looking.
Yes.
You're kind of like the little kids stomping their foot wanting to be right and not, really sort of saying that without saying it, it's my way or the highway kind of approach.
Yeah.
There's much more growth that comes and much more, I guess, cooperation and communication and intimacy that comes when we can start to try and find the benefit to what we're seeing is wrong about their way of doing things.
Which actually brings me to the next point, which is when we're talking about balancing ourselves, we're also talking about balancing our perceptions of people around us, so particularly our partners, when we want to say, well, you don't show up in this way or you don't parent in this way, is looking for the opposite. So do you want to...
Yeah, so perhaps, I definitely see that I hold space through emotional triggers, and perhaps better than my husband does. Like, so I can sit with the big tears for a long time and can kind of hold the anger generally, but there's times when he can sit and play in an engaged way and really bring an enormous amount of generosity of spirit to his engagement with our kids, whereas sometimes I just cannot find that at all. Like, he seems to have that on tap, whereas I know I don't. So for every time that I think that I hold space perhaps better, in inverted commas, I am looking for examples where he also brings that to his relationship with them, but in his own unique form. Because we are both bringing it, just in our own different ways to our kids. And the more that we can start to look for evidence that they are also bringing their own unique flavour and consciousness and connection, we limit and kind of calm down that triggered response within us that wants to make us right and them wrong. And we're then able to enter into a more cooperative and loving dialogue about what we're wanting to feel heard around and feel, find resolution on.
So eloquently said, Bridget. I loved it. Yeah,
Thanks.
I totally agree with that. And I think the more we can do that, the more compassion and heartfelt opening we produce. Yeah, absolutely. So that's our Christmas tips for you this festive season.
Yeah.
And we do wish you the merriest of Christmases and, hopefully not so much frenzy in the lead up.
Yeah. And really hoping that you find the space for softness within yourself and towards others around the dynamics at play at Christmas. And we're sold a cultural message that says it's all joy and fun and laughter, but it can also be enormously painful for a lot of people.
That's
and
very true.
It takes us straight back to our childhood, so often, particularly with children ourselves.
Yeah.
So really just be gentle.
Yeah, missing loved ones.
Yeah.
It can stretch our ability to hold space.
Yeah.
For sure. So make sure you're filling up that cup too.
That's it.
So we would love you to connect with us on nourishingthemother.com.au/online programs, Loathing to Loving. You can check that out if you would really love to dip your toe in post-Christmas and really set 2018 off to a really conscious, self-awakened state within yourself and your family. We're on Facebook and Instagram as Nourishing the Mother. And to connect with you, Bridget.
Yeah, it's suburbansandcastles.com.
And movies?
Yeah, we're kicking off the new year, in fact, in February with a film all around intuition and understanding intuition, which is really interesting. So getting straight into it in Feb. And to connect with you, Jules?
Is thepleasurenutritionist.com. And you do it.
You need to nourish the woman to...
Nourish the mother.
Nourish the... Oh, no, I stumped it up. Nourish the mother to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.